Shy Yeti.
Hello, Moses.
How are you? Hope you're fine. This is the Shy Yeti Show.
Okay, where you go?
Why have I got horns?
Oh no.
Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Oh, there's going to be some drama ahead.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep?
Oh, your show's getting so international, Paul.
Boy, he's not all that shy, is right.
Such a win that I had.
Blimey, Governor, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Excellent. 7, 4, 3, 7, 3, 4, 3, 4, 3.
Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast The Shy Life.
Hello. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. So, what's this episode going to be about? Well, I'm afraid we're going to jail. Yeah, we're going to jail. Little Uncle John has finally sent us to jail. But weirdly, it's a women's jail. But no, don't worry, listeners. It's not as bad as it seems. We've got a special guest, a special returning guest, and we're going to be talking about the show Prisoner Cell Block H. So let me run the theme music. When we come back, we'll get started.
Darling, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
My favorite person is here.
Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling.
Yes, but it's a positive thing, Paul. The high life, the shy life.
I'll go anywhere for a potato.
Delicious.
Hello, captors. How are you?
Oh,
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh, I hope he hasn't found out my secret. I think he has.
I love the Yeti test. It's my favorite thing.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Yeah, I am strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
I could eat my body weight in crisps.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
It's all gooey and meaty and yum, 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 yum.
It was enormous.
I don't think I'm ready to speak about it.
here comes the grizzly.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
I can't wait for it to begin.
That's right, I'm just being an AV.
I like that.
Hi there.
Marvelous, Paul.
I was looking back, knowing nothing about anything.
Okay, so we're back. Yes, we're talking about Prisoner Cell Block H. So can you guess who the guest is? Yes, it's Andy, the birthday twin. Hi, Andy.
I'm innocent. Let me out. Hello,
That's what they
Paul.
all say.
Are you okay, Paul?
I'm all right, just about. We've already had technical issues. We're only a few minutes in, but
It's already gone wrong.
yeah, I've moved the computer to a different room and I'm sitting on a hard chair. But so it'll sort of I'm going to channel my Prisoner Cell Block H.
Just pretend you're in the interview room being interviewed by one of the prison warders, and she's trying to extract information from you as to what you knew. What did you know about that riot?
I'm not going to be able to. I'm not allowed to make contact or whatever.
No physical contact. Put that cigarette out.
Yes. So, listeners, this time we're going to be talking about some of our favourite characters on Prisoner. I've actually just started to rewatch Prisoner, even though I've got all the DVD collection. It's just handy that it's on Channel 5 and you can just click a button and then I'm on Channel 5 anyway, watching Home and Away, so it's not such a big step. And I kept seeing little adverts and things, and I'm about 30 episodes in. It's been a while since I've watched the early episodes. But I don't know. It depends whether, because they've only got the first 2 seasons, it depends whether they put on more.
No. They've just put the third one on.
Oh, did they? Oh, yes.
They've literally in the last few days, they've just put. I can't get used to them calling them seasons. Is it series or seasons? I can't get used to that because I suppose for your listeners' benefit, Prisoner Cell Block H is something that has been in our lives for probably well, at least half of it, maybe more. And it's had a huge impact on both of us. And even when we didn't know each other all those years ago, it was still having a big impact on us then, wasn't it? And when you look at what television was like 30 years ago, you were dependent on somebody VHS recorded something, or maybe you'd got some recordings yourself that you'd kept, or you'd find a tape that you'd not played for a while, and you found some old things that you'd recorded on, or maybe you'd got friends that had kept some of the episodes, and it was really it was almost like a bereavement when it finished. I can remember me and a few of my friends had like a prisoner party for the last episode, and we were all just about to go off to university as well, so that kind of dates it. And we were kind of like a bit. It was like a bereavement because we couldn't watch it anymore because it had been so important to us.
I was sort of used to the whole swapping recordings and things from being a Doctor Who fan, but my Doctor Who friends weren't necessarily Prisoner fans. So although I was able to kind of ask one or two who lived in different regions to record tapes for me.
Yes.
But it took me much longer to see the end because TVS never got to the end before it lost its franchise, or whenever it was that they weren't able to show it anymore.
And I suppose this is the other thing. You know, when we think about programs today, that they're kind of networked, aren't they? And they're shown across the whole country. But Prisoner was one of those things that it depended which ITV region you lived in. And for some people, on Central, where I was in the Midlands, we'd had it since, I think, about 1985, 1986. And they were showing 3 episodes a week, but it was ridiculously late. And I've got memories of waking up at 2 a.m. and realising I'd fallen asleep and missed tonight's episode, or you kind of missed it because you'd forgot to set the video recorder because it was on ridiculously late. I was the other way around. I watched, I think when I first saw it, it was an episode with Chrissy in. And it's the one where she snatches the baby from the baby home, and she says, "I'm not bloody going back there. You can come with me, or you can piss off," or something like that. And that really stuck with me. And so I then watched it right through to the end. And it was the earliest episodes I'd never seen.
Well, I never saw the early episodes either,
right?
Because I came in around the time that Vera left.
Right. So that's quite And
at the same time as I was seeing it on TVS, I went to Birmingham and they were starting to show it again, so I saw some early ones, but my reception was awful. And then my mum kept recording it for me when I was at university in TVS, but then they whenever that takes us to their right to show it stopped because Channel 5 got it.
But so Channel 5 started and they showed it, didn't they?
We didn't have Channel 5.
Did you not get Channel 5?
In the end, we did have Channel 5, but I wasn't living there, so I had to get another friend. When it got to roughly the point that I thought I'd stop watching, or been forced to stop watching, he recorded the last year or so for me. So it was well into the.
So we probably had about 10 years.
I saw the final episodes.
We probably had about 10 years after Channel 5 finished it, before the DVDs started becoming available, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because you're right. It was about 2000 and I'm trying to think. It was after I'd moved to Yorkshire, so I think it was about 2005 when they started. So that's probably about 8, 9, 10 years from like the late 90s, isn't it? Where the only way that you could watch something that, for me, it had such a big impact on me as a program. The only way I could watch it was borrowing videos off other people, and the quality was getting really poor, and people wouldn't have the full set because they'd lent them to people and not got them back, and the videotape quality was kind of really bad, and the technology was changing, so not everybody had a VHS anymore. So I think
the postal service was still better in the 90s than these days. In that, I remember sending tapes that people had lent me of Doctor Who and posting them off to other people, not really asking if that was okay, but doing it anyway. And they were off there, got there the next day, and were back with me the next day. And there was nothing ever got lost in the post, so I never had to sort of. But I don't think I'd risk doing that these days if I was in that.
No, and then there's a video sharing website which we probably can't mention, but people have uploaded episodes on there, and yeah, I mean, you watch that, you got constantly bombarded with adverts, and the quality's not always good, and that. But it's so nice to just be able to sit in the comfort of your own home and stream the episodes as they were meant to be shown. Yeah. So they've just put series 3 up on my 5 app. So
so by the time I get to season 3, they may have put season 4, and I won't have to.
Hopefully.
I mean, not that my collection's hidden away. It's just I always had a bit of a, being a librarian for so long, and where everything's in order. My home collection of DVDs is the opposite. It's like I want it to be like walking into a jumble sale or something. But really, it's. I mean, yeah.
You mean you haven't Dewey Decimaled the whole of your DVD collection? Ball, I'm so disappointed.
Yeah, I don't. I like to be unpredictable. This is what got me in jail in the first place.
Oh no! So how many years sentence did you get? I know we're not supposed to ask each other what our crimes were, but how long did you get?
I probably got at least 6 years. Yeah.
Wow. Well, them's the breaks, aren't they? So it's interesting, isn't it? I always think when with a lot of programs that are running over a period of years, I think you often find people have that kind of golden era in their mind, don't they? These are the best episodes. These are my favourites, and it quite often can be because that's the point where they started watching, and it maybe holds the strongest memories for them, or maybe it was a particularly good part of the series that they were more interested in, or maybe that's changed over the years. But would you say you've got a particular favourite era? With Prisoner,
I've only got more than one, but I'm definitely very keen on the Dr. Peterson era, because that's the first big era that kicked in after once I started watching it.
So I always get really mixed up with what season it is or what year it is, because I watch them in a linear fashion. I can't split them up into different years, and because I'm that much of a nerd, we sat and worked out. There was a Prisoner Cell Block H forum that I used to be on. I don't know if you were on it, but we sat and worked out when the production was, rather than the date that they were shown, because you can see that sometimes there'll be an episode and then next episode the hairstyles have all changed, and that's because in Australia their production method, they finish in, I think, December, have the summer off, have Christmas and New Year, and then resume filming sometime at the end of January. So you might, if you just had your hair done in December for your Christmas party on the beach, obviously because it's Australia, by the time the end of January comes, you've probably been on the beach and got sunburnt hair, and you look you're completely tanned. So you would see some episodes where the characters would just completely change appearance from one scene. It actually worked out where the production years were. So the Kate Peterson era, I always think that's 1981.
Yeah, I think it is.
I think some of it's 82 when it was shown.
Towards the end of 81, maybe.
Because I'm certain that she leaves and Mari Winter leaves and all the characters that leave at the same time, that was the end of production for 1981. But it was probably shown in 1982.
Yeah, that's sort of how I think of.
And it is
when I sort of think about when I started to watch that, I was kind of say I started from about the 1981 episodes. But.
And it's such a good story. I've actually sat and I've actually put the first episode where Kate and Sandy arrive in the paddy wagon together, and then watched the whole thing unfold, because it's basically these two women that are brought into prison, a bit like ourselves today. They arrive together in the paddy wagon. One is really cocky and outgoing, and the other one is a bit of a more reserved middle class, and it turns out she's actually a doctor. And you think she's going to be the one that's really going to struggle with being in prison to start with, if that's a fair thing to say. But it's interesting how it kind of shifts focus, because up until then, from the start of Prisoner, we've had some quite central characters, haven't we? And it's pretty much ended up being a trio of Queen Bee, who's the top dog, Lizzie, who's the old woman, and Doreen, who's a bit of a, how would you describe Doreen? A bit childlike in some ways, and obviously had a lot of, perhaps a bit naive. And you've had that trio of them for quite a long time, haven't you? And then they, for some various reasons, they aren't the focus of it anymore, and you get these two other characters come in that really steal the show.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think that's a particular. What is it that you like about Kate Peterson or Sandy Edwards or either of them? Or
I think it was even more so. I like Sandy because she was kind of strong and spunky and funny and kind of.
She's got some really good lines, hasn't she?
Yeah, and I sort of liked her, and because Kate was involved as well, I kind of ended up liking both. And then obviously you realise that things aren't, things develop. But I mean, in a way, knowing more about the show than I did when I first saw it, Kate wasn't the first character to be a little bit sort of privileged and a little bit snooty. There'd been others before her, but I didn't know that. So she probably seemed quite different from a lot of the other prisoners.
She's a really, really complex character, isn't she? Because, as I say, when she first arrived, she's this middle class, a bit not got much in common with the other prisoners, and you think she's going to struggle, and maybe she'll be quite weak in prison, or she'll be taken advantage of, or maybe beaten up or whatever. But she is quite a strong character, isn't she? But she's quite friendly to people and quite charming. And I remember there's this scene where her mother comes to visit, and that's the first time that you actually see she's not like that at all. She's actually quite cold and quite not interested in her child that's come to visit as well. And she sees him as an annoyance. And obviously she's told the other prisoners that she really loves her little boy, and hasn't she killed somebody that, and she kind of says that the man that she's murdered was a threat to her child, like he was some kind of child abuser or something, and that's why she's done the murder. Complete lies, because she's killed him because he was about to expose her as a corrupt fraud doctor who was embezzling money from the healthcare system.
Yeah. I should have reminded myself, but I can't even remember why Sandy is in jail.
She's definitely like criminal underworld, isn't she? Isn't her husband? He's mentioned, he's never seen, but there's definitely some reference to her and her husband both being arrested, and maybe they've been involved with the mafia, the Melbourne mafia, through the underworld connections and drugs and guns and stuff like that. But she's quite anti-drugs, isn't she?
Yeah.
So she can't be a drug dealer.
I remember there was somebody outside because she has that affair with Steve Faulkner. And I might be imagining it. I'm not even sure that. Does her husband die at some point? And
yes, he does, because
Steve sort of,
there's something to do with the prisoners are maybe it is to do with drugs, but there's something that's been smuggled in. I think are the women doing extra work and then getting paid for it, and then Mari Winter gets it changed from cash to drugs, and some kind of letter comes in to say that they want Sandy to do something, and she never gets it, and because it's not done, they murder her husband in prison. Because Mari Winter, who's one of the baddies in the show, she's transferred from the other prison as well, and she kind of is a drug person, isn't she? And she intercepts the racket that's going on through the laundry. A lot of the action, for your listeners that might not know, it's set in the prison laundry. A lot of it, isn't it, where the women are just washing and ironing and laundering sheets, and they've got this massive steam press. Which, if you've been a naughty girl, you get your hands put in the steam press.
Yeah, and be careful, because somebody might try and show you how to use it, and then accidentally use that as a way of tricking you to getting your hands trapped in the steam press as well. So,
and then you're walking around with bandages on your hands for the next 3 episodes.
Yeah, do beware. That's what happened to Lynn Warner quite early on.
So one of the things that I think has been interesting about Sandy Edwards is her departure, isn't it? Because she leaves the show a bit ambiguously. By this time, the prisoners have all worked out that Dr. Kate Peterson is dangerous, haven't they? They've worked this out and they've decided they want to kill her. So Sandy gets the job of killing her, doesn't she? And isn't there some scene where they go out? It's during a recreation break and they're out outdoors and Sandy's got this knife and there's this scene where they kind of go off together and there's this bit of this joke about who's gonna come back into the prison afterwards. And we have to wait for the next episode. And when that comes round, what we see is it's not Sandy that walks back into the prison. It's Dr. Kate Peterson that comes back in, isn't it? And she's no idea where Sandy is. So rather than being the victim, she's actually... something's happened, hasn't it?
I don't know whether it's ever clarified, whether they sort of left it open because the actress who played Sandy was pregnant.
Yes.
They sort of left it open so she could come back, but then she decided not to. But I'm not sure if that is official or whether that's old wives' tale or
well, there's a podcast called Talking Prisoner where the guy that runs it has managed to track down some of the story writers and the actors and the cast and the crew, and they actually did an interview with the actor that played Sandy Edwards because she was a scriptwriter on Neighbours for a lot of years. So they're speaking a lot of detail about what she wrote on Neighbours, and she's got some really good memories of things. And her take on it was, there's like a rubbish truck, isn't there, that comes into the prison, and I suppose what it comes down to is, has Sandy been murdered by Kate and her body's been put into the rubbish truck?
Yeah.
Or has she somehow clung on underneath the rubbish truck and managed to escape? Yeah. Her take on it is that it was an escape because, like you've just said, they wanted to leave it open in case she wanted to come back.
Yeah, well, I hope so, because I like Sandy. I didn't want her to be crushed and minced up.
So the actor's view is that they'd left it open for her, that there was an opportunity for her to come back, but because she was pregnant in real life, I think she says it's something like her husband had got a job somewhere else, so they'd actually moved away from Melbourne. So by the time she'd had the baby, things had moved on, so it just didn't work out. But I suppose for us as fans who've been wondering for the last 20, 30 years what happened, that's the actor's view of it, that actually she did survive, she did escape, and that does fit with the story, doesn't it? Did you want to say more about Kate and what she's like as she has a breakdown? And
well, because doesn't she really lose it after Sandy vanishes? I
don't know though. I've always been. I think I'm going to have to watch it again because on the surface she's such a complex character. She's a doctor. And she's so in control of things. When you see that first scene, as I said, when her mother comes to visit and she's quite rude to her mother and openly admits that the reason that she murdered Conrad was not because he was a threat to her child. She tries to smear him as a paedophile. He's actually because he knows that she is... she's committing embezzlement and fraud. That's why she murders him. She doesn't. It's not to protect her child. It's to protect herself. And I've always wondered... being a doctor, she would know exactly how to fake a breakdown and being psychotic. And I never know, is she or is it faked or is it somewhere in the middle? I just don't know. But it's really well acted.
And eventually she gets transferred out. Does she get transferred out with Mary Winter? Or am I imagining that?
Well, she campaigns for a transfer, doesn't she?
Mm.
And she campaigns for a transfer and becomes quite depressed and kind of won't get out of bed and stuff. And there's this scene where Officer Powell comes and says, "Okay, Peterson, get dressed. You're being transferred." And she's like, "Yes." So she struts out of the prison, doesn't she? And she's like, "I'm getting away from all of you people, and you've lost, and I'm being sent somewhere where I'll be safe." And then, like you've said, they open the van door, and who's going with her? Mari Winter, that's been trying to kind of kill her for a few episodes. So she just refuses to go, doesn't she? And then I remember there's this scene where they put her into a cell with Judy, and doesn't she try and strangle? There's this really shocking scene where Judy comes back to the cell and Kate just jumps on her and tries to strangle her with a pair of tights or something. It's really demonic, isn't it?
Well, I think I remember certain scenes more than I realise I do until I start talking about them.
There's a really hilarious scene with Mrs. Davidson, the governor, where Kate talks to her almost as if she's a colleague. And when the door knocks, she says, "Hello, come in." And you think that's the person inviting the person in. And she calls Mrs. Powell a menial.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, don't they have to strap her to a bed and she screams? There's one night where she screams all night, and
I'd quite like to in a moment maybe go back and talk about the very early characters, because I'm quite familiar with them again.
You've just been watching them.
I was wondering if there were any other. There's certainly, I mean, we don't have to just do it in one episode anyway. We can always come back and talk about other characters. But do you have any other favourite eras? Because I have a particular one I want to at least talk about a bit.
A couple. I really like the era with Cass in it. You know, from kind of like you've got Minnie and Cass and Bobby.
Well, I mean, that's kind of one of my
that kind of and Reb,
one of mine as well. But I was also going to say the Sonia Stevens.
Yes,
it's all the same
that's
sort
good,
of,
isn't it?
You quite often hear people saying, "Oh, it all drops off once B's gone," which is episode 400. And
not at all.
Not at all. One of my favourite eras is once she's gone, and when you've still got Lizzie for a little bit, and I always liked Jude anyway, so you've still got Jude.
Sonia's a really good character, isn't she?
Pops up now and again. But.
Don't they call her the Ice Queen or something when she first arrives? And in fact, she's one of the few actors that was in the remake in Wentworth. She was in that as well, and she's one. I think there's only a couple of them that they actually had in when they reimagined Prisoner.
Yeah,
and they did it. The character of Sonia Stevens is in it, but the actor that played her plays another role, and she's obviously a really good actor.
Yeah, I've seen she's been on either Neighbours or Home and Away in the time I've been watching it again as well. So
right.
It was ex-prisoner actors that kind of drew me back into Neighbours originally, because I started to notice that there was, lots of them were sort of making small parts, and then eventually the actress who played Doreen came in and played a massive character for many years. So, far longer than she played Doreen on Prisoner. But.
Yeah. What are your memories of Sonia? Have you got any memorable scenes that you can remember? Like, wasn't her husband a police officer? And wasn't the twist that she was actually involved in drugs and prostitution, and to have a respectable cover, she married a policeman? I mean, that's a bit far-fetched, isn't it? But surely the police would know that there was a gang that were like running all the prostitutes and all the drugs, and that she was part of it. Why would he have married her? Come on. That's never really explained, is it?
I don't have a particular scene I remember at this very moment, but I remember I just liked her whole era, and I think she's only really in it for about 50 episodes.
And she gets to go to bed with what's his name? Ray Marr. That was in Home and Away. Is he still in Home and Away?
Yeah,
it was Alf. Yeah. So in Prisoner, he plays 3 characters, doesn't he? And they're pretty much all the same.
Not the same time.
They're pretty much all the same. They're all kind of nasty pieces of work, aren't they? So the second character he plays is some underground mafia boss, isn't it? Yeah. And don't they escape to Sydney, and she has a fling with him for a while, and
she has a similar ending to Sandy in that you're not quite sure what happens to her. her car is like found on the top of a cliff.
That's right, yeah. And there's this scene with her enigmatically standing on the cliff edge, isn't there? And she's looking down at the water. And then next time you see it, isn't there a bullet hole in the car window?
Yeah.
Now we've not seen the car window get shot, so whether there's a bit that they've edited out or whether that's just to make you think, has she faked her own suicide, or even has she faked making out like she's been murdered, as in someone shot at her car and then thrown the body over, or has she just escaped? Who knows?
Yeah.
What do you think happened to her?
I like Sandy, who is a sympathetic character. Sonia's not such a nice character.
No, she's not.
But I liked her, so I want her to be being a baddie somewhere else. She could have turned up on another soap and been bad on that soap, so I'm hoping she survived. But
and I think there's some really good stories in that era, isn't there? I really like the kind of Cass and Bobby relationship, and even Minnie, and it's really sad when Minnie gets transferred, and that last scene where they're saying goodbye to her. And I know she wasn't the best top dog ever, but she was quite a character, little Minnie. I
like Minnie a lot. Yeah. I can't remember how everybody sort of overlaps, but Pixie definitely comes in when Cass is there, doesn't she?
Yeah, Pixie's back in it because you've got that Dr. Edmonds, haven't you? Who he tries to brainwash. Cass into killing.
Like my favourite plot line ever.
Yeah, that's all in that era as well, isn't it?
Doctor who hypnotises people to kill people, which I've stolen so many times in everything I've been.
And you've got the end of Mrs. Powell in that era as well, haven't you? Her husband and her kids are blown up, and after that, after a few weeks, she decides to leave. And
didn't that happen to another one of them?
Fletcher's kids and wife are blown up, aren't they? It's a bit of a repeat.
It's more destructive for the spouses than it is for the actual warders. But.
Yeah. I tell you, one of the other characters that's in it in that era, which I was always felt a bit disappointed with how it didn't really develop, was Rachel. Do you remember Rachel, the one who isn't her dad a newsagent, and the father gets kind of hit and run with a drunk driver, and when he goes to court and gets off, Rachel takes the law into her own hands and does a hit and run on the guy himself. So she's then in prison. I thought she was such a good character with such a lot of potential, because I think she was quite well educated. Was she a college student or something? And she'd been having a relationship with one of the prison officers, hadn't she, outside before all of this happened? And I just thought she was such a good character, and she could have progressed into being, because obviously with having done an on-purpose hit and run, she was going to get a life sentence. Or she should have got a life sentence for just driving a car at somebody and mowing them down. But I just felt they didn't really. Her character just seemed to drift away, and that was a real lost opportunity. I thought she could have been like the next Top Dog eventually, or something.
That plot line's quite similar to one of the plot lines in the early episodes I've been watching, where Water gets
Catherine.
Yeah.
And actually, that daughter that gets raped, she's the only actor in the whole series that plays two characters that both get raped.
Oh God!
Because later on in the show, when you've got the three, when you've got the guy who shot Dennis, we've got the three male prisoners later on.
Yeah.
And what's it called? Frank escapes from the prison and hitchhikes, and this woman, and he rapes her, and it's the same actress that played the little girl that got raped all those years before at the episodes you've just watched. So
just like, I need to get a better agent.
Yeah. So you could kind of give them the same thing again. I quite like Catherine Roberts' story. I think that's good, because one of the first stories that they did, wasn't it, where once they got the go-ahead to keep making Prisoner, because it was originally like a short piece, wasn't it? But once they got the go-ahead and they needed to develop regular stories, the Catherine Roberts story was quite good, wasn't it?
Yeah. I've got to like the early 30s, so I've sort of.
And have you seen Susan Rice yet? The woman who's the shoplifter with the pop stars.
Played by.
Is it Bryony Behetz? Yeah.
Yes, who I've seen in other soaps, including British soaps. She was in that Families, I think.
Yes, that's right. The one that they tried to do half of it was in Manchester and half of it was in Australia. That went on for quite a while, didn't it? That one, Families.
Yeah, I started watching it. I think Jude Law was in it at the start. That was one of the first things he did.
Yeah.
I didn't discover. I think I discovered it around the time they gave up on the Australian side, and I quite enjoyed it. And unfortunately, I botched watching the last episode because usually they were half-hour episodes, and the last episode was an hour. So I set the video and I got the first half hour, but I never actually found out what happened in the last half hour.
Right. Oh no.
Well, I could go back and I'm sure I could find it online now, but it's a little bit late now.
Things have moved on. I do like Susan's character, though. I think it's interesting. I mean, we start off seeing this young, quite pretty woman in a shopping centre shoplifting, and we soon find out that she's the wife of this guy who has got something to do with this pop star, and I think people assume that he's like the pop star's agent, or that he works for the pop star, and that he's basically, this guy has abandoned his wife and kids and become dedicated to this celebrity. And in fact, I think there's even some reference to that perhaps. Well, I can't really think. Is it called Frederick, the husband? That perhaps Frederick and this pop star are lovers, and that. And that I think, but people don't know that. They just assume it, don't they?
Yeah.
That Susan's husband has kind of like been playing away with a fella, and then it all twists around, doesn't it? Because there's this scene where Susan gets released, and the pop star, is it called Jason, the pop star, and he's on some TV show.
Yeah.
And I can remember Meg and Jean watching it on TV, and they spot Susan in the TV audience.
Yeah.
And after the performance, she goes up and throws acid over him. And that's when the truth comes out, that rather than her husband working for this Jason Richards, which is the pop star, he actually is him.
Yeah.
And it's this. So she has been abandoned by her husband and stuff, but not because he's devoted to a pop star. It's because he is that pop star, and the look of I think it's quite a shock of a twist, isn't it? Because everybody assumes that it's like the husband is like in love with this guy, and it's actually the same person.
Yeah.
Thought that was quite good.
So, of the very early characters in the first few months. Who are your favourites?
I think, I mean, I struggle with some of the early characters because I suppose when it was started, it was almost supposed to be like a 20 episode thing, wasn't it? And then that was going to be it. And then because it was so popular, they decided to make it going as a series. And I actually think, from the early, perhaps like the early 30, 40 episodes, some of those guest characters, I think I actually quite like them because they're quite strong and quite interesting stories. I mean, I suppose we're supposed to like Lynn and Karen, aren't we? Because it starts with them arriving at the prison together, and Lynn turns out to be innocent. She really was innocent, but then ends up back in prison again, and we see what Karen goes through. And I never really warmed to either of them, really. I think Marilyn's quite a good character. I think she's quite interesting, and
because Karen sort of stays for pretty much the whole season. She's involved with the end of the season, but Lynn sort of manages to stay a little bit longer. But it's amazing, really, how sort of those characters are sort of held up as being iconic characters, but their actual time of the show was quite brief, particularly Frankie, who's only in it for 28 episodes.
I think, I suppose, though, looking at the context of it back in the because it was it 79 when it was shown, to have a lesbian character who's quite in your face as Frankie is, I guess that was quite shocking for the time, maybe, or quite groundbreaking, and I can see why it stuck, even though the character's only in the show for maybe 20 episodes. You can see why she's got that iconic people.
Yeah, they managed to cover quite a lot of ground because it turns out that she can't read, and in a pretty tragic way, because people are beginning to suspect she can't read, but she gets a letter or a telegram saying that her brother's been critically injured in an accident, but she pretends she's read it because she doesn't want people to know she can't read. and in fact she misses being there when he dies because of that, and then that makes her decide she ought to learn to read. So she's not just a sort of a thug.
When her and Doreen escape, and Doreen gets would you say assaulted by that guy that they're living in his room? She does stand up for Doreen, and doesn't she thump him, or she gives him a thumping anyway because of the way that he's treated Doreen. So she has got that caring side to her, and I think in some ways it's a shame that she didn't continue, really, because I think, is it quite well known that when originally it was one episode a week, and the actor felt when they went to 2 episodes that she couldn't do that much, so it was her choice to go, and they actually wanted to keep her going. And I think the story that they give to Karen about going to university, and I mean, I don't quite know how you could go from not reading to become a university student in 3 weeks, but that whole storyline of getting an education and doing better with yourself, that was actually originally planned for Frankie.
Yeah, because Karen's a school teacher, isn't she?
Yeah, but when the actor that played Frankie chose to leave, they had to give that story to someone else, because they'd already worked out the idea of maybe going to university, getting a bit of an education, and then getting out to run the halfway house. And I think that's what they'd originally planned in for kind of Frankie's character. But I'm not sure how you would have gone from being illiterate to being like a postgraduate.
Because Lynn is a naive country girl, and who was working for a family, and she's accused of killing a baby, burying it in the garden. But it wasn't her; it was the wife. But
it was the wife. And that house that they live in, that is like the decor in there. Haven't they got like gold bed linen and everything's brass, isn't it? Like a huge brass and onyx telephone, and it's so.
But then they sort of, after her main story finishes, they have Lynn sort of doing work release and that going well. Well, actually, she gets let out because when they find out that she was innocent of what she was originally accused of, but she ends up hanging out with.
She marries that guy, doesn't she, Doug? Yeah.
Yeah, and then she ends up in bed again.
And it's silly, isn't it? Because don't they get married one day, and then the next day he decides to do a bank robbery, or like a robbery in a factory or something.
Yeah,
and then you kind of, they obviously didn't have much in terms of props or scenery, because you see this scene where Lynn's outside some warehouse somewhere fiddling around with a car, and the husband comes running out of the factory, and his mate's been shot or something, and they obviously couldn't show the robbery. But then next thing, Lynn and her husband are driving in this car, and then they've had a crash, and you think, well, you haven't even seen the crash happen, and the husband's like half dead, and she's covered in blood, and you just think they've obviously not had the budget to film those things, but they needed it for the story. But it's the day after they got married.
The whole thing with Frankie and Doreen escaping actually goes on for more episodes than considering that she only does 20 episodes. They must be on the run for at least 5, if not more, because they end up. I like it when they go to the old lady house.
Miss McBride.
Yeah,
and she knows she knows exactly who they are, doesn't she?
Yeah, but she's lonely, and you meet one of her relatives who clearly cares more about potential inheritance.
Yeah. I tell you who we've not mentioned. We haven't mentioned Mum. I really like Mum. I think she's a really good character.
Yeah.
And she was in prison for. I suppose even today that's still a controversial subject. She'd assisted her husband to commit suicide, and he was terminally ill. And when the series first begins, and everybody, obviously Mum's not a real name, it's a nickname because she's been like a mother to a lot of the prisoners. Mum and Queen Bee are due to be paroled, aren't they? Because that's the episode where Bee immediately gets sent back to prison because her what she's planned to do when she gets paroled is to find the husband who allowed their daughter to become like a junkie and didn't look after her, and she's got a little present for him on the doorstep, hasn't she? In terms of a gun, so she knows she's going straight back to prison. But I really liked with Mum how they explored her story's quite tragic, isn't it? Because she's got a daughter and grandchildren, and she's thinking she's going to get released.
Madge from Neighbours.
It is, isn't it?
Who also plays a number of characters in Prisoner. At least 2, maybe 3.
Yeah, I think it is 3. It might even be 4.
She Rev Keen's mum as well.
Yeah, and she plays a policewoman when the Halfway House episodes are on. She plays a policewoman. I think she comes to interview somebody. Maybe it is 3. But I really like those scenes with Mum and her daughter, who's Madge from Neighbours, and because obviously the daughter feels, I don't know. I've got in my head there's some scene where the daughter says something quite nasty, and she says, "Your father would be really disappointed if he'd heard you say that." And she was like, "How dare you talk about my father? I loved him, and you killed him." And you can clearly see that the daughter hasn't accepted the fact that he was dying anyway, and that she didn't murder her husband. She helped him to end his life because he was in pain.
Her mum's son-in-law is more sympathetic.
Yes,
than her actual
Lorraine.
daughter.
The daughter's called Lorraine, isn't she? It's Lorraine. Lorraine, and Lorraine comes across as quite a false character, doesn't she? Who's more interested in socialising and being a snob and showing off her family. And she gets the kind of the irony is that it turns out that her eldest daughter's actually pregnant.
Yeah. And
rather than turning to Lorraine, she actually turns to her grandma, because don't they have to lie when Mum first does go home to Lorraine, and I can't remember the husband's name, but because Lorraine's told the family that her mother died, they have to pretend that she's some long lost aunt or something.
Yeah.
And when Judith Ann hears that it's
but then
really
the granddaughter
grandma,
overhears.
Yeah.
But the thing with Mum is that she's a regular, but then I think when the show was continuing, she stays with the show, but she's not in it constantly.
Yeah,
although
they bring her back a few times, don't they?
She doesn't take very well to being prick, because she decides she can't live with her daughter, which she's kind of meant to as part of her. But I'm not sure how. Certainly, it's expected that she will be living with her daughter, but that doesn't work out. So she lives in a.
She gets a flat somewhere else, doesn't she?
Yeah, she lives in a horrible little bed and breakfast, and they're not very nice to her. And she commits a crime to go back in again. But
thinking that her family don't want her, and actually, the granddaughter does want to get to know her, and
she ends up living with the granddaughter. And then when B escapes, because B gets.
That's right. Those episodes where B wears that dreadful wig.
Yeah, and she goes on the run and turns up at Mum's house. And
yeah, that's right. Judith Ann spends all their money on buying her some clothes just to get rid of her, doesn't she?
Yeah. That's about the point I've got to at the moment. But
right, and then I think they bring Mum back later on as well.
Yeah.
Is it not when B's got amnesia?
Yes. Yeah.
And she doesn't remember. She doesn't know who she is, but she's just got this memory that there was a really nice lady at flat number 5 on a particular street that would be able to help her, and that turns out to be Mum in the end, doesn't it? So that they bring her back another time.
Yeah, so
she was in it quite a while.
And you sort of hear just before B leaves, it's sort of reported that Mum died. So by that point they must have known that she didn't want to come back. And of course, Mary Ward was on Sons and Daughters.
Yes, she was, and she was a really memorable character in Sons and Daughters, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Does say it wasn't that she died in real life. She had another 40 years.
Yeah.
She lived to be 106. So.
Yeah. It's just a shame, really, that the whole kind of I mean, I suppose with the pandemic happening and that talking prisoner guy tracking down some of the actors, it's a shame that didn't happen a few years earlier, because it would have been interesting to hear Mary's recollections of the series and hear a bit about her life, and because she was one of the longest living cast members, wasn't she? So
it's very similar to what there's a Doctor Who fan who does he's quite well known in Doctor Who circles, but he's done a podcast where he's tried to track down all the really obscure Doctor Who actors and ones who may have just done one episode in the 60s or whatever, and interviewed them. It's good that there are people out there who are prepared to do that, even when they're not always met with enthusiasm initially.
No, we've not mentioned Chrissy.
Chrissy
we did mention her, but what about Chrissy?
It's weird because she's very important in episode. Is it episode 3 or 4? She's around, and then she.
So you said you've got to around episode 30. Has she come back into it yet?
No, not yet. But that's the thing. She's transferred after what happens in the first few episodes, and then you don't see her for quite a while, and then she comes back and she's like a really important character for.
Yeah. I think you're not that far away from her coming back, if I remember rightly. If you're about episode 30 odd. Yeah. She was a great character, and there's this story, isn't there, where the actress, because she's a British actress that's playing her, isn't she? And the character's British as well. And there's this story where the actress was she like bullied her way onto the auditions. Because she decided she wanted a part in Prisoner. She didn't do it properly. She just turned up and she said, "Oh, I'm here for my audition." And they said, "Well, I'm sorry, but your name's not on the list." And she was like, "Well, that's not my problem. I'm here. I need to do my audition." And she forced her way into it, and they loved her that much that they kind of wrote a role for her.
Yeah.
And she was so popular with the viewers, like you say, that they kind of brought her back, and she probably came back more than anybody else, didn't she, Chrissy?
Yeah, there's another character that similarly comes and goes, who's one of my favourites, is Helen Smart.
You're thinking of Helen? Yeah, Helen. Yeah, Helen's great, isn't she? Yeah. I watched the episode the other day where Helen comes back and she speaks with a French accent. When she arrives in the reception and she's talking to Jim and she's saying, "Oh, Jim, you have been waiting for me," and I just think it's really funny.
yeah. She comes in a little bit later though, but she's sort of, it's always good when she turns up for. So, and she's sort of also soap opera royalty and has been on.
Something that
Home and Away quite recently.
Yes, she has, hasn't she? And wasn't she in Neighbours for quite a while?
Yes. She had Cheryl Stark, I think.
Yes.
I wasn't really watching Neighbours that much when she was in it, but I've seen a few old episodes.
One of the things about Helen is she has a long-standing friendship with Judy, doesn't she?
Yeah.
When Judy escapes to try and get Jock, she goes to Helen for help, doesn't she? Well, in fact, Helen, when the pantomime and the tunnel and that big escape happens, Helen helps the prisoners out. She gets them a van and goes to the bank and pretends to be Doreen and kind of gets some cash for them, and Judy and Helen have got this really nice friendship, and they explore that a few times, because there's this really when Judy decides that she wants to work in a massage parlour to catch Jock Stewart, Helen has to show her how to walk like a sex worker and how to dress and stuff, doesn't she? And I've always thought Judy's ending is a bit rubbish because I mean, we can go into that another time, but her ending is quite poor. But basically, somebody arrives in a sports car and drives off with her, and I've always thought it would have been good if that could have been Helen, because I think that would have been a nice way if they could have brought that actress back that played Helen just for that one scene. When Judy's getting released, it's Helen that comes and meets her out of the prison, and they drive off
Judy's
together.
in it for a long time as well.
She is, isn't she?
The longest running character, other than Meg. up until that point.
And I would have liked that. I would have liked to have just seen Helen one more, because I think the last time we see her, isn't that after she's been given quite a long sentence because her sister, the sister and the cult and they stab somebody, don't they? And when she's like brainwashed or whatever, and Helen's trying to help her, and Helen ends up getting the long prison sentence because of it. And I think that would have been a nice way just to kind of redo it, to kind of like show that friendship still existed, and it was Helen that had now been released and perhaps given up the game and.
I know we were trying to talk about characters rather than plot lines, but you might have to help me with names of characters. But I do love when they bring in the halfway house anyway, because it makes for a good sort of location outside of the prisoner. Outside of the prison.
I liked it.
It gives at times when Judy isn't in jail, it gives her a good role to continue, a reason to continue.
I think that I mean, when Judy first gets released for the halfway house, and again, that's another good example of Helen helps her out. And do you remember when they have the kind of launch of the halfway house, and Ted Douglas turns up, and Helen gets him drunk, doesn't she? And doesn't she like sneak away back into the city with him or something? Can you see them walking off together?
Yeah.
And then you've got the really quite brutal storyline of Donna Mason, the drug addict. Isn't she one of the first guests in the halfway house, and obviously Susie Driscoll as well. And
yes, I always remember Susie Driscoll, and I like the whole, I like the cult thing. And isn't there a sort of slashery type thing where there's people being killed on the streets?
Yes. So they take the prostitutes in, yeah. And you've got that young lad that worked with Judy. What was he called? Tony. He was a good character. Tony. I liked him.
Yeah. But the thing, one of the most memorable plots, I think, is when, and this is where I can't remember the name off the top of my head, where the character, there's a character who's been in it quite a long time, but she gets cancer and she starts to go blind. And
Hazel Kent. Yeah, that's so sad, isn't it? When Hazel starts to lose her faculties, and I think one of the scenes that really stuck with me was the one where Hazel's boyfriend would never marry her because hadn't he got a wife that had got a mental health issue or something, and she was in some kind of hospital. So Hazel and her chap could never get married, and so George has been looking after the kids all the years that Hazel's been in prison, and obviously Hazel's been in and out of prison, and she's been a drunk, and she's not had a very good life, and she turns up one day on Judy's doorstep, and Judy thinks she's drunk again, but actually it's because she's got a terminal brain tumour, so she's slurring all her words, and she isn't looking very well. And there's this really sad scene, isn't there, where the kids come to see Hazel, and they don't realise that they're saying goodbye to her.
Because it's a euthanasia plotline, basically, which is also what Mum's story is. But this is a lot more graphic because you're seeing it happen in front of you, and it's a character that you've known for quite a while as well.
Yeah, it's really sad, isn't it? And it's that the bit where she says, "I want you to help me. I want you to help me end this." It's really really difficult, isn't it?
And I think when I first saw it being quite young, it was even like more because I hadn't really seen anything like that as well.
Assisted suicide. So I suppose it explores what Mum had been through with her husband, that we never saw that happen. But through the Hazel Kent story, we do get to see. You see it from both sides, really, don't you? Because I think Judy struggles with it for a while, doesn't she? That somebody, if your best friend asked you to help them end their life, how could you do it? But then when you see how their life is just slipping away,
poor Judy goes through a lot, really. because when she first comes into it, it's her partner that she's very much attached. I can't remember the ins and outs of it now, but I know it's her partner that ends up getting her in jail in the first place. And
Sharon,
or doesn't she almost commit a crime so she can be with Sharon, who doesn't?
She does, Judy gets caught. Yeah, she gets caught smuggling drugs in, so that she can be put in prison to be with Sharon. She does go through a lot.
And then there's the Jock Stewart thing, which when I first, because Jock Stewart is a really corrupt.
He's awful, isn't he? In a good way.
Yeah. But I never saw. When I came into it, I only saw when she got her comeuppance. I hadn't seen what he'd done to her when she was still in jail.
That rape scene is just. I mean, you don't actually see. Well, I think you do see. I think you see him pulling his belt off, and she's lying on the bed screaming. But it doesn't go any more than that. But the impact afterwards of Jock having raped Judy, it's just horrendous. And that next day when he comes back and she's put a lock on the door and he kicks his way into the flat, and it's terrifying because he's already raped her, and you think, well, what more is he going to do this time? And we've got that scene where does she pick up some fly spray and she sprays him in the eyes, and then they run out, and then he, luckily for her, falls down the stairs and isn't able to move. And how ironic that he'd actually murdered Judy's girlfriend by throwing her down some stairs and breaking her neck, and then some years later he himself falls down a flight of stairs. And has clearly, obviously, broken his back or something.
I think this is the strong thing about like continuing dramas. Sometimes I hesitate to even call them soaps because Prisoner isn't a typical soap. It's more than that. I don't know. I don't know if you agree or whether, but it just feels like it's kind of. It's a lot more hard hitting than a Coronation Street or a...
Definitely. And I think with some soaps, you see that they've almost got certain episodes where there's like a filler, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because they've kind of got to keep the 2 episodes or the 4 episodes a week going, or they'll drag something out. Whereas with Prisoner, there's some episodes aren't quite as good as some of the others, but. And there are lulls in the story. I mean, when you've had big things like the fire or the terrorist siege, the next few episodes are going to be a bit flat because they can't maintain that pace of action.
Going back to the Kate Peterson and Sandy Edwards storyline, but back in the day, in around '92, I think we saw those episodes, and I was very enthusiastic about the show. And my American pen friend came over. And I was sort of raving about Prisoner, and then I guess after such a big storyline, there were a couple of quite, down to earth, nothing much happening episodes, and those just happened to be the ones who were on when he was staying, and I felt really embarrassed. I'd raved about this show, and there was nothing on screen that kind of like
had the same level of
demonstrated
drama.
Yeah, it was like the worst possible episodes for him to see, but.
It's different. I mean, and I think probably when you look at, I know people always talk about the Barnhurst 5 era as being maybe the worst part of the show, and I don't actually think it is. But you've got, after you've had that do they call it the Ballinger siege, where you've got the terrorists break in and spring Ruth Ballinger from the prison. After then, it does go through a stage where they couldn't keep the story at the same pace, so it's always going to seem a bit less. You've just lost one of the main characters, Myra, who's been the top dog for probably about 100 episodes, who was an exceptionally good character. But you've still got Lou Kelly, and you've still got the freak in it. You've still got Lexi as well, if people like Lexi. But you've still got some good characters around. It's just, I think it just takes a while to kind of pick up again, doesn't it? Prisoner, I think people have to watch it for themselves, because it's clearly had a huge impact on both you and me. And independently, it's not like we've just watched it together, because you watched it in the 90s, I watched it in the late 80s and the 90s, and continue ever since. I mean, as I say, apart from those years when it wasn't available, I've always like not been not watching it, if that makes sense.
At the moment, I partly I think I've got a short attention span. I don't necessarily have anybody to watch TV with. If you're watching TV with a partner or flatmate or something, then it becomes a routine. I find it harder to watch things like when it's by myself, because I get after 20 minutes I'm like, I want to do a bit of editing now, or Dealey the cat has just been trampling all over me and something, or I mean. At the moment,
what we should do is we should pick a night where you're definitely going to watch a significant episode of Prisoner, and I'll watch it at the same time as you, and then you can video call me afterwards, and we can talk about what we thought about it.
That'd be good. That'd be good. I tried to suggesting that with movies with people as well, and if they're younger, they kind of it might be in text, but they look at me blankly, or text look at me blankly. Why would we want to do that?
Because I mean, there are some episodes that I've thought this before, and you almost like have to talk it through with someone else after you've watched it, because it's there's so much going on, and there's so much to process, and how it makes you feel. I mean, I think let's do that. Let's watch an episode together, but not together, like virtually, and then we can say what we thought about it. But no, I think people should just people should just watch it.
Yeah.
And there's 690 odd episodes.
So many characters. What I was partly saying, I sort of got distracted by saying it's not really a soap. What I was also trying to say is that don't be afraid of just going in at a random point if you've got access to it. You don't have to see it from the start. I didn't see it from the start, but something hooked me, and then I wanted to watch the next episode. And like I was saying with Judy in that Jock Stewart plotline, didn't matter that I hadn't seen the original. I already liked Judy, so all I needed to know was that person had been bad to her. For all I knew, it might not even have been something we'd seen. I didn't matter.
I just want to add, as horrible as that relationship is between Jock and Judy, and it's not just when she sees him at the races, doesn't she? And that's when he sees her, and then he turns up at her flat, and that's when he rapes her. But there's been a previous one where it all starts when he's in prison, doesn't it? And he murders Sharon, and he admits to Judy that I loved the sound she made as she fell down the stairs, and she's like, oh, that's horrible. So it goes on for quite a long period of time, doesn't it? But what I was going to say was, I've seen an episode of Cop Shop with both of those actors in, the actor that played Jock and the actor that played Judy, and they're playing a married couple, and you can see the chemistry between them. They must have been great mates, because the two actors, they play this married couple so well. You just can tell that even though when they were in Prisoner, they've had some really horrible, dramatic, awful things to film, where the characters really, really hated each other, and she was terrified of him. You can clearly see that in a different program with a different storyline, the two actors really gelled really well, and I think that's it's a good thing to have in your mind when you're watching it.
Yeah, and these storylines stick with you. But anyway, well, I think we'll come back to this subject in another episode. And there are so many characters, and some of the big ones we've not even touched on yet.
And it would be interesting to maybe, this might need a bit of pre-thinking, but I'd like to know who some of your least favourite characters are in it and why. Because I suppose there's always people always say, oh, I hate this person and I hate that person, and they're not very good. But I always think it's interesting to hear why. If you had your worst 5 characters in the whole series, who are they and why don't you like them? I think that's an interesting one to explore with people, but we could talk about Prisoner forever.
But, well, we'll definitely be back, and it's not like the Birthday Twins can only talk on podcasts. We do talk sometimes. We're not podcasting, but it's a nice way to spend time with each other and with the listeners. So,
thank you, Paul. It's been lovely seeing you again, and let's do it again soon.
Yeah, definitely, and maybe we'll be let out on remand. I don't know.
Well, the thing is, how are we going to get out? How are we going to do any printing?
No, we'll have to dig a hole. We'll have to dig a hole. I don't want to go down in a hole, to be honest. Maybe I'll wear a funny hat. Maybe there'll be like a jumble sale, and I'll dress up as a...
Yes! Do you think you could get an old pair of curtains and maybe make a big kind of jacket and a hat to match?
Yeah.
Do you think that would work?
Definitely. Well, we've got to get you, but we've got to get both of us out there. So.
Well, I've decided I'm going to steal an officer's uniform and spray my hair a different colour, spray my head a different colour, and I'm just going to walk out the front gate dressed as an officer.
That sounds a good one. I'm glad you said that one. I was worried you were going to say you wanted me to arrange a helicopter so you could just jump on a ladder and get like what happens to is that Mary Winter the second time?
It is, yes. Steal someone's uniform and walk out as a prison officer.
Yeah, you do that. Yeah, I like the idea. Much cheaper. We can't afford the helicopter. So anyway, all right. Thanks again, and thanks for listening. We'll be back again soon. And bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
I gotta go now. Bye.
I want to talk with you.
Gotta go. Bye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Wow. Really? No kidding.
Thank you, darling. And you too. Bye-bye.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear. What's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast. Let's go.
I have a voice.
I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice.
We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
That is so cringe, oh my god. You're a man of culture as well.
I've still not watched Wentworth from beginning to end. I started watching it when really the only way of watching it was perhaps to buy a DVD or.
It's a difficult watch.
It's on Channel 5. What do you think of Wentworth? Is it worth me watching it all? It's all on Channel 5, so
it's worth watching, but I think it's nowhere near as good as Prisoner. No. I never really felt. One of the things that's really good with Prisoner is the stories are so good and the characterization is really good. With Wentworth, it's more like they've picked a bunch of actresses that look quite glamorous or look quite interesting, but it's more about the personalities rather than it is about the stories. And because they recycle and rehash some of the Prisoner storylines, like Vera's mother being ill and Vera can't go out because she's looking after her mother, they shouldn't have done that. They should have just developed their own storylines. To me, it's like it's better in some ways. They've obviously got a decent budget, and when they have a riot, it really does look like a riot. And when people are fighting, you do see blood and you do see people getting stabbed. And I think someone's tongue gets cut out in one episode. So it's really gruesome, and it's really more up to date in terms of what you can get away with showing, but it's just lacking. It's lacking a soul, if that makes sense. It's worth watching though.
If I was going to watch, something that wasn't Prisoner but was like Prisoner, I'd probably go for Bad Girls because that was just quite fun.
Yeah, it got silly though towards the end, didn't it?
Silly. It had Christopher Biggins in one episode getting kidnapped in one episode.
Well, And for me, it got silly in that there was some quite jarring cast changes with Bad Girls as well. I think from once most of the original cast have left at the end of series 4, I think is it series 5 and 6, they just bring random people in, and you just think, well, they're trying to repeat earlier storylines again, and it just doesn't work.
I mean, I watched it, and then at some point got distracted and stopped watching it, but I did buy all the seasons, and then at some point went through them all, and I enjoyed watching, including stuff I'd never seen before.
One of them that was really, really strong that I think really was good was the character of Yvonne Atkins. Is that the woman that was in EastEnders as well?
Yeah,
she was really good, and she's a good actress, and she's a really good character. And I liked the way that they played it out. And even in the end, when she dies, I thought that was really well played out as well. But after she went, it really seemed to go downhill from me.
What about Orange is the New Black? Did you watch that?
I did, actually. And what I warmed to that, because I think because they didn't try and recycle the storylines, it's a bit daft that this white middle-class girl decides that she needs to go to prison because she has to face up to some crime that she's done. So she puts herself in prison for 12 months. That's ridiculous. But I quite liked the stories on that. There's a whole season where they have a riot.
I love that
watching.
Season. Apparently that season wasn't very popular, but that was my favourite season. I like the fact that they kept the whole season for that plot line.
And then in the later season, when they turn part of the prison into an immigration deportation, and some of the prisoners that have been in it right from the start, because they're from Central American countries, because I guess this is like the change in the government, isn't it? That they start deporting people, and how awful that you've just lost your status. And that scene with the kids in the courtroom where they walk in on them and the kids are being deported and they don't really understand what's happening, but they're being deported as children just because they've like come from Mexico or Cuba or something. They're just deporting them as children. That's awful, but that was really happening.
I've always said, and I don't know what it says about me, but I wouldn't be interested in any of these shows if it was male prisoners. I wouldn't be interested in a TV show about male prisoners. There's something
you're right.
About women in jail that
there is something about women in jail, and I mean, you could look at lots of different angles as to why that's appealing to you and me. I think, is it something to do with we don't very often get to see shows just about women?
Yeah,
and it kind of, you see the bond that women can have with each other.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's just more interesting in the sort of different types of sort of characters and the way that they interact and the power games and.
Whereas I did try and watch. There was a show with men in prison, wasn't there? It was an American one.
Yeah,
and it was quite risque, wasn't it? Because there was a lot of same-sex activity in it. What was it called? Because I just thought
not Jailbreak or something like that.
No, it wasn't. And I started watching that because you'd got like the white guys and the black guys and the Latino guys and the Irish Americans as well, and you kind of got all those different factions, and it was better than I thought it was going to be. But there was a heck of a lot more violence in it, and a lot of rape, and a lot of. But it was better than I thought it was going to be.
One thing I've never seen, because I just don't think it's sort of out there much, is that show that was sort of the male version of Prisoner from that only ran about a season.
Punishment. I've never watched that. I don't
know if it's available online. Wasn't Mel Gibson in that or something? Or at least
I think so. I think he was.
It was the very early 80s or very late 70s.
Do you know, now you've mentioned that, I am going to try and see. I think I started watching the men's prison, the American one, in the start of the pandemic, but then for some reason I stopped. But I think the difference is when you've got men in prison, they just fight with each other.
Yeah.
It's just constantly, it's just fighting with each other, trying to get alcohol or drugs, raping each other for power. And there's not much more to it than that. It's quite superficial. I think the difference when it's women in prison, you can see there's a lot more characterization and a lot more story development and a lot more interest. It's not just people fighting for the sake of it.
And it wasn't in those early episodes I'm watching at the moment. There's quite a good team of like warders, and there's Greg the doctor, and then there's the social worker, and you've got the lawyer who's in it quite a lot.
Steve Wilson with the smoothest voice in the West.
more than one sort of case, and you've got Vera, who's the sort of the for want of a better word, the bad warder, but she's not all bad, but especially not compared to some of the later ones. But
this is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Well, gotta tell you, I didn't expect that.
What the hell just happened on the show? I mean, seriously, reverse it, because I lost. What's going on? What happened?
Man, was that worth it or not? Oh my goodness, that was a darling little shoe. Whoa, I love that one. Great show, Paul. That was a good shoe.
743.
How beautifully done.
Oi, that's your lot.
Oh, everyone's a critic.
You can always call me.
The whole siege and the sort of
I've turned the computer on, but you can't print anything because the printer's gone funny.
Yeah.
And I'll try and sort it out.
I don't have any internet. What do you want us to wind it up?
What?
Do you want us to wind it up? It's just that I can't get the internet in my bedroom anymore.
Well, I turned it. It shouldn't affect that.
No, I mean, I'm just saying. Do you mind just keeping talking?
I'm just telling you, I can't. Don't ask me to print.
Oh no, I don't need you. I don't need you to.
Sort it out tomorrow.
No, I don't need anything printed. It's fine.
I'll leave that on if that helps you.
No, it's thank you.
Paul, if you can't print anything, how are we gonna get the in tray sorted for Mrs. Davids?
To do this podcast without printing it.
Oh, bless him. That's lovely of your dad just to tell you that you can't print. You need to leave that bit in.
This never happens on Radio 2.
Et voilà.